Pega, I know you personally requested that the previous AMAs be recorded, and they did get recorded, but I have not uploaded them yet. And I might, in fact, take both of them from yesterday, and I might. I'll at least upload the first one, I guess. I don't know what else to say there. But anyway, taking a look here at Xeon, good old Xeon. And can you guys see my screen? Is my screen visible to you guys? Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, check it out, guys. Daily art rotation. How great is that? Look at it. It's a wizard and apparently a witch, and they're in here with the fucking beakers and stuff. They're in the lab. Yeah, anyway. Fantastic stuff. The EPR, or should I say the APR, is also quite competitive. And if you guys have been paying attention to the decks lately, our volume is, we're just getting higher lows, if that makes sense. So, you know, we had higher highs than before. We were 12,000, right? A couple times. And now it's like our volume's low is just not going as low. And granted, this does certainly help when we have a liquidity surge on the decks. But the point being is that this is the type of liquidity that can kind of effectively auto-catalyze a certain amount of incantation that, should we effectively get enough players, will in fact automatically scale the activity of the decks. Does that make sense? So believe it or not, right now it is in fact just the fact that we just need more players. And the fact of the matter is had we launched sooner, we wouldn't need to potentially do the marketing and the promotion of this. But I effectively now have to eat my words, because I know for a fact that right here in the beta guide, if you go to docs and you look at beta guide, I specifically just open it up and I say, don't talk about this project. Don't talk about this project. Because like, oh, hey, we're just going to keep it like this. It's going to be a fucking secret, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, it is what it is. But the point being is, while that does work effectively with a few dozen people, if we don't ever get to that threshold of a few dozen people, it'll just be quite a bit of a drag. And that's just unfortunately the way it works. But I'm now satisfied, okay? And when I say I'm satisfied, if we pull up Deck Screener right now and we go look at the token that we care to observe the most with its performance, it is continuing to behave exactly as it's designed. Does that make sense to you guys? So we now have 12 days. Have you guys seen this drawn up like this with the yellow lines? Have you guys seen it, the yellow lines and the blue lines? Do you guys know what these are? Do you guys know what I'm talking about here? Okay, I started doing this yesterday. So every yellow line represents an incantation. So every yellow line here, they're not always evenly spaced, right? Sometimes you have a long space between here and here, like a lot space here. This tall one right here was not an incantation, believe it or not. That is not an incantation. That was just somebody buying at, like, I don't know, an hour before an incantation. I don't know what's going on there. It was in fact this one right here. This was the incantation. Isn't that crazy? This was just like a shit ton of activity on the chart. Yeah, that was the incantation, but it did go higher and higher. And then, of course, we just continue to see what we call the velvet rope pattern, right? So we were in a downtrend starting on, what day was this? This was the 20th. Starting around the 20th, we broke into a bit of a downtrend. Why were we in a downtrend? Because we saw surges of meeting happening the 2 days before that. Does that make sense? So you end up with Pyre, Phantom in an oversupply condition, which will end up manifesting a lower price on the chart. Now that downtrend is kind of smoothed out, so I already drew these blue lines in there. So as you can see now, this is the 22nd, and we're going back to the 21st, and pretty much back to the beginning of the 21st. The 21st has been been less of a downtrend. It's still technically going down slightly, but it's almost flat. Does that make sense to you guys? Can you guys see this here? It's still technically a downtrend, but like by a very, very easy slope, whereas on the 21st, the 20th was a much more significant downward slope. But here we are, in fact, at this flat kind of consolidation line, which, by the way, was exactly where you saw it for going here for about, what, 4 days? Yeah, about 4 days, maybe 5 days. Does that make sense? And it's from here that you'll continue to see that it'll break into an uptrend. It'll break into an uptrend. Why? Why will it break into an uptrend? Do you guys know? Can you guys hear me? And am I talking too fast? Yeah. Do you guys can you guys explain why it'll eventually kind of consolidate flatly and then kind of this break? I don't know how to describe it. It'll just kind of slowly shift patterns into an uptrend. I mean, not really patterns, but trends. The pattern is the same, but the trends change. Yeah, exactly. More volume, more BR is definitely part of it, Plantanzo, but also less meeting. Less meeting. Does that make sense? So as the price of this coin, Pyre Phantom, is now here at 0.1299, about a nickel and a third. If we go here to the meeting interface, you have these tokens 0.1319, 0.1324. I guess Xeom is back up here above 0.19 because I think whoever is buying or selling Xeom, they are in fact now speculating on how Pyre Phantom behaves. So that might explain, like, you know, that did. But we want meeting. Oh yeah. I mean, you do if you're a knight, not if you're a witch. Yeah. You get what I'm saying, Clantonso? Yeah. Right? So I'm talking to you guys about the witch game here. Like, meeting, you want meeting to get back to peg. But like, if you're a witch, meeting is like a stumbling block to you, if that makes sense. This is why we have the server split up. Does that make sense? But the point being is the red candles on Z-share and stuff like that. Like, let me duplicate this chart. The red candles on Z-share against Phantom, right? So here's a great chart to look at. This right here was like cataclysmic. Do you guys see how just broad that chunk of red candles was right here? Just the reddish sentiment here on the 19th. And then people bought the dip, and then people contested that, right? It went back down. There was some bullish sentiment, not that much bearish sentiment, but enough to bring it back down. And now we just see a steady uptrend where it's almost at where it was before, right? $4.33. And this volume right here is also doing wonders for bringing Pyre Phantom out of a downtrend, you know, into a fucking sideways trend, and then eventually it'll break into like a little bit of an uptrend. And then it will, the longer it stays in an uptrend, by the way, the longer it stays in an uptrend, it will go up parabolically, okay? What limits it going up parabolically is, of course, meeting, right? And meeting is, of course, the way that the knights climb back to peg, if that makes sense. But considering that we're now going to, considering that now it's, I would say, over 75% likely that we'll do a Genesis event. It'll be, I think, the chaos and the commotion that helps the knights get closer to peg, and then the mechanisms of PyroSwap will take over, kind of in the background where everyone else can't see. We'll just the mechanisms of PyroSwap will take over there, and yeah, we'll get TWAPs a lot higher, which will help just drive more and more sentiment, which will help drive more and more volume, which will then positively feed back. And yeah, then we'll be at 0.8 TWAP here in no time, probably during Genesis. Yeah, I mean, the Genesis will likely be 60 days long. So if I haven't told you guys that, it's likely a 60-day Genesis. And it's meant to be, you know, exciting, but also manageable. I don't know how else to describe it. But we will do this Genesis on all three chains at the same time, just to be clear. So we'll do this Genesis on all three chains at the same time. And we will deploy... we will have the website like where it is now, so we'll have the website kind of finished up. So these buttons here, these buttons will be connected, and of course, we'll probably list the Genesis pools here on the farm page, of course, right? We'll just list them here at the bottom or whatever. And we'll have this connected, and we'll also have the dashboard on top of the IWV, the Elastic Supply dashboard, because I think that's just a useful touch for comprehension. And yep, that's what it's all about. I might make them have the dashboard be collapsible. Maybe I can ask for that, because maybe that's easier to see it all on one screen. But you also don't need to analyze the dashboard in real time like you would this. Okay, When I mean the dashboard, I'm saying the Professor Phi's Elastic Supply dashboard. So if we go to Tomb Finance, and we go to this room, room right here, this dashboard right here, obviously you guys don't see one on the Incantation Witch Vault yet, but the thing is, this is also an extremely useful dashboard to have above the Incantation Witch Vault. So there will be another one of these over on this display. It'll be above this, and since it takes up a little bit of space, I might make it collapsible, but I think at the same time it's fine because you can just scroll down. Yeah. Anyway, who here has a question? But, Clan Council, you're right. Meeting and meterage also does add volume. Does that make sense? So, like, that volume, first of all, I can talk a little bit about, I can talk about this concept right here, this particular tool, this particular instrument. So you guys have seen this before, and in your language, you might know it as a balance or a scale. And the word that I use for it is tarazu, because tarazu is a Hindi word that is in fact a little bit more precise to this exact concept. Because when you talk about scale, sometimes this means to grow something by multiples, and if you talk about balance, this could mean anything, right? Like this balance and scale in the English language are not clear enough words because they have all these additional definitions. But in Hindi, they call that tarazu, and tarazu does not mean anything else. Like it doesn't. This is not a reference to anything else like scales or balance would be. Does that make sense? And this is an important instrument to understand, because if you guys are aware, this was the first system used to kind of like gauge the fairness of trade. Does that make sense? You guys have all seen this. This is an instrument that was invented in like plenty of ancient cultures in the Bronze Age, effectively. And it has really mostly three components that you need to care about. One of them is the fulcrum. The second one is the beam. And then three is the pans. Does that make sense? Do you guys know which part's the fulcrum, which part's the beam, and which part's are the pans? Do you guys know that? Who here does not know the parts that I'm referring to? Because if English is not your first language, you might not know what fulcrum means, if that makes sense. Let me see. Damn, you know what? I cannot even find. Yep, fulcrum, yes, other two no. Fulcrum is leverage point. Yeah, so here I'll actually pull it up in the thing. Let me say like this is actually better for Google than for Brave. Okay. So anatomy of a balancing scale. Is this going to work out for me? Yeah, so if we go to images, this button right here, or let me see. Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Look at this, they call it something different here. But the way they have this labeled is annoying to me. Let me fucking find... You know what, I guess, or whatever. We'll just use their anatomy here. Let's look at this. This one's cool because it uses a reverse. It uses balloons to take mass away and then uses weights. That's kind of fun. But anyway, let me actually find... So it's important to understand that this is fulcrum. Here we go. This is the fucking image here. Copy image. Okay, so you have this. You have a beam, which is effectively the middle part, right? Does that make sense? The beam is really the part that in fact is it's a lever. Okay, the beam is a lever. Does that make sense? If you guys are familiar with a simple machine known as like lever and fulcrum, this is where you get the concept of the idea of leverage, right? So I think there's a quote that Newton said, or maybe Einstein said, "Give me a long enough lever and a fulcrum with which I can place it, and I can in fact move the entire planet." Something like that. What was it? Lever and fulcrum quote. Maybe it's Newton. Maybe it was fucking. Oh yeah, Archimedes. My apologies. Yeah, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum which will place it, and I shall move the world. Here, I will also, in fact, paste that here. And I'll just keep this as well, just in case this is somewhat useful. Okay. So the point being here is the fulcrum right there. This is the point, fulcrum of the beam. It's the point upon which the beam rests. And when you're kind of measuring something equally, and you're not using that thumb wheel, by the way, and the thumb wheel can in fact add friction or add resistance or even add like biasing to the fucking scale. The fulcrum is the point that kind of gauges the balance of the two pans. Does that make sense? So you would end up putting one thing in one pan and one thing in another, and they end up balancing, right? Now you can in fact find out like what the ratio of those would be by using that thumb wheel right there, which is in fact also ancient. Because back when they were in fact doing barter like this, they were doing things like trading, coinage for wheat and grain and produce and such, right? So the weight of coinage in its value is not going to be 1-to-1 in the weight of wheat. Does that make sense? So they would use these things like thumb wheels in order to figure out like what are fair rates, right? And this was meant to get accurate. And the most important thing I want you guys to understand is that the constant product formula is literally just this device. Okay, x, y equals k. Does that make sense? So when you divide it like this, it doesn't make sense. But what it actually is y equals k over x, and then of course x equals k over y. Does that make sense? That's the real way to think about it. Okay, and this constant product, you have to understand that in order for one of the ends of this beam to go down, the other one has to go up. Does that make sense? And I know that you guys quite often think this is Euclidean algebra, but it's not. This is calculus, because for every 1 degree that the beam tilts, it is in fact changing the height of the pans exponentially from each other, and exponentially from the base, the floor. Does that make sense? So like you're not only are the pans actually changing slowly exponentially different, but you're also in fact changing exponentially different from the floor. And you guys can see that on the swab screen. I'll show you guys that. So if we do phantom to pyrophantom, let's say I just want to take 10 and I want to move to pyrophantom, you guys can see that this has a 0.77% price impact. Do you guys see that right there? Can you guys see that? It's very tiny. So let me zoom in maybe. Can you guys see this 0.77? Okay, but if I were to multiply this to 100, if I multiply this to 100, does it become 7.77? No, it's a completely different number. It's now 10.21. Does that make sense to you guys? So like just because we did a 10x here doesn't mean we're doing a 10x here. Does that make sense? They are in fact, there is something called convexity. Okay, convexity. Do you guys know what convexity means? I actually have a great image for convexity. Hang on. This is more like an SOTMA than a fucking AMA, but you know what? It's a fucking great. This is actually a great curve to understand even the incantation of witch vault, because this is when they talk about convexity with a yield curve. Does that make sense? So you can have positive convexity or negative convexity, and that effectively affects the way that a straight line skews. Now, if you want to know, like, I'll just tell you my opinion. The reason why I see so many people, so many devs effectively, and if I do 1,000, yeah, that's also not a factor of 10x. You know, it went up to 53. So there's just curvature there that people don't think about. If you want to know why I see a lot of stuff getting built in Web3, and I don't want to talk shit because I still have to kind of really prove the success of this, even though I think most of you guys in the audience now understands that it works. I want you guys to understand something. You guys in the audience who are effectively like the biggest believers in Fidianism, you're probably 90th percentile intelligence in the fucking Web3 space. Does that make sense? The majority of other people in Web3, they are in fact those very same, who had that fucking GIF? In fact, I saved it. Let me see that GIF. Let me see that fucking GIF. Even if you guys think like, oh, but I haven't, you know, I don't know that much about blockchain or crypto. It's like, yeah, but at the same time, if you figured out that I do, if you figured out that I am not half-assing this, or if you figured out that I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but this picture right here, these octogenarians that are just tapping away the last few years of their life on those literally just like player versus machine games where it is almost virtually impossible to take a net gain like long term. Yeah, anyway, the point being is most people, I'll tell you this, if they can't even figure out that I know what I'm talking about, they feel insecure about it. Does that make sense? So when they listen to me, they feel insecure, and I don't always mean to try to come off fucking arrogant. It would probably be more effective to be humble. But the point being is, I worked in 2022 with dozens and dozens of Tomb Fork devs, and I kept seeing that there was like this conceptual error they were making. And generally speaking, I found that they had what I would consider a Parmenidean brain as opposed to a Heraclitan brain. And you can't really study price charts or economics if you don't understand that it never stops moving. Does that make sense? Like the economy never goes to sleep because the planet never goes to sleep. Does that make sense? It goes through cycles, but like it's always on. You know what I mean? It's heating up and it's cooling down, right? As the sun is looking at it or the sun's not looking at it. But the well, as the side, right? The night side or the day side. But the point being here is if people can't even grasp like 10% of what I'm saying, they're just looking for someone to kind of make the decision for them. And I've always felt that this type of shortcut was kind of not really effective for those investors because they are effectively getting led like livestock. Does that make sense? So if you're listening to an influencer, quote unquote, a KOL as it were, does that make sense? If you're listening to a KOL and do you guys know what a KOL is? A key opinion leader. And they're kind of just like telling you these declaratives. Do you guys know what a declarative is? Yeah, it'll be like, you know, the sky is blue. Yeah, exactly. The sky is blue. And it's the sky is blue. It is always blue, right? The sky is blue. It is a sure thing that it will be blue. Does that make sense? Some of you guys, I know that a few of you do occasionally leave your house from time to time. So you may have seen times when the sky is not blue, like during storms or even at nighttime or even during sunset and sunrise. Do you guys get what I'm saying? So when you make these declaratives, and yes, Bo is correct, their truth, which is also, I think that they are in fact emulating each other. Like they see somebody else talking confidently and they just copy that. So when I first started talking about terminal utility in 2022, a lot of other people in announcements were writing about it in their announcements, but they had no fucking idea what they were talking about. They were just copying my verbiage, and it fucking blew my mind to just see myself get parroted like this, and then they would kind of abandon that narrative because they kind of didn't understand what the fuck I meant. For those of you who don't understand terminal utility, there's a great fucking metaphor here we can talk about. And I think this one here is the sink. Let me see. I have it saved. Yeah, okay. So this right here is like this. This is a running sink. Okay. If you search for sink in the GIFs, Do you guys see this? It's a hand washing sink. Do you guys see it? Hand washing sink. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I'm also going to show you another GIF because this is another plumbing metaphor. But I'm assuming since 90% of my audience is male, you guys have at least looked and dealt with the underside of a sink at one point in your life and possibly even the other mechanisms that govern a toilet. So I'm going to pull up that GIF because that's another great GIF to actually describe this. Here it is. This is actually the fucking mechanism right here. So for those of you who don't know, modern toilets, at least a whole bunch of them, they use this floating ball or this floating volume that in fact rises with the water level in the tank. Do you guys see number 6 there in that GIF? The number 6 item? The number 6 component? Yep. Okay. So as the water level rises, it brings 6 upwards, which closes valve 7. Does that make sense? Usage that will not recover. Do you know what? It's more about Pega. When you use it, you don't get the coin back. That's really it. Like the coin is in fact, terminated. Terminated. Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah. So that is why I call it terminal illness. I also call it terminal because it's something for you to plug the coin into. Does that make sense? So yeah, it's terminal because it does. Yeah, the coin dies, and 2, you also insert the coin. Like you, in fact, the coin is used by you. Does that make sense? Like so, if you think about terminal the way, that like an electrical terminal. Does that make sense? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, a vending machine, it does in fact keep the money. Do you get what I'm saying? So vending machines do not delete the money; they just give them to the owner of the vending machine until when that person picks it up. Does that make sense? So terminal utility is in fact not revenue. It is in fact like deleting the currency, and this is very, very new because this is. Honestly, I'm not the person that invented it. Other people have done it. I'm the first person that created this as a tokenomic concept and kind of explained what makes it different from regular utility. And other people have figured that out, like Ethereum and Avalanche and Phantom. They all use gas as a terminal utility. Other chains don't. For instance, Bitcoin does not use gas as a terminal utility. Does that make sense to you guys? Bitcoin does not burn Bitcoin when it gets sent as gas. It in fact sends that gas to the miners. Yeah, so the way that Ethereum rewards its noders is through expansion. So it inflates directly to the noders. That is the same way Phantom works as well, and Avalanche I believe as well. Does that make sense? So the miners also play for that in lottery, Maddie. I believe that's how it works. I feel really good today, by the way. But yeah, so that's how that works, Maddie, because again, there is 21 million. There's a 21 million total supply of BTC. Does that make sense? And it's always 21 million, and there is this kind of like religious reverence around the number 21 million in Web3 as well. Like it's just like the original fucking supply cap. But depending on the type of token you're creating, having a hard cap to supply does not necessarily make for a good. That doesn't really make for good. Okay, if you create a supply hard cap, it's like you're giving your token a future that you don't realize. Like if you're going to give it a hard cap of supply, then the scarcity of it has to matter at a certain point. Do you get what I'm saying? So like when you see these fucking meme coins, remember those meme coins we look at? They keep talking about them having a supply hard cap because that's the way that they indicate that they're not a rug pull. Does that make sense? Like, oh, hey, supply is hard capped at this number, and they're like, okay, great. Is that good or bad? Like, they don't fucking know. They're just kind of mimicking each other. But we're using elastic supply coins. Does that make sense? So when we expand the supply, we later contract it, right? And that's the way that Ethereum works. It's the way that AVAX works, and it's the way that Phantom works. BNB does it a little bit as well, but I think BNB has a total supply. So BNB is a little bit weirder, but it is what it is. So the point being is, why am I showing you guys the sink in the toilet? Why am I showing you guys the sink in the toilet? Do you guys know? The boardroom of a tomb fork is like a sink. Yeah, BNB does burn, yeah, but I think it also has a total supply. So that means like it doesn't expand. Yeah, BNB, it's, I can look that up later. No, Phantom is in fact 5% a year expands. Yeah, and then it burns in gas. It did have like a, I believe Phantom did have a pre-sale, so it did start with a certain supply. But then after that, it is expansion. No, Phantom is elastic, yeah. Phantom is elastic and it burns in gas. Yeah, so every time, yeah. No, it is not. Yeah, Phantom is expansionary. Yeah, unless they just changed that. Phantom has been expansionary for all of 2022 and all of 2023. Yeah, they burn. It's elastic. It's elastic. So Ethereum, for those of you who don't know, Ethereum mints 800 ETH every year, and it gives them to the noders. And the way that they deal with this expansion is they burn it in gas. So Ethereum has a terminal utility because when it gets used as gas, it gets burned. Phantom is the same way, but Phantom, only 5% of it gets burned. Does that make sense? It used to be 30%, but then they kind of turned the burn rate down because they wanted to create gas monetization. Does that make sense? So personally, I think they should turn the burn rate back up for gas, but the fact of the matter is they wanted to create like a gas monetization program, so they have the burn rate low right now. But yeah, no, Phantom expands every year. They do give node rewards for transactions, but they also burn it. So they have like a combination, if that makes sense. But that does require it to be a Yeah, you know, it might have a hard cap, Alessio, but I want you to know, Avalanche also has a hard cap, but it's elastic. Does that make sense? Because what it does is it expands towards that hard cap, but never reaches. Does that make sense? Yes, so ETH is elastic, so it's inflationary and deflationary. Yeah, so it might have that total supply like written there, but I'm pretty sure that it's kind of like the way Phantom is. Okay, it's kind of the way that AVAX is. So AVAX has a hard cap, but it never reaches that hard cap because it's elastic. Yeah. So I know that like some of them have that barrier in, but I don't think that matters when you create elasticity. Like Avalanche does that too, and what they do is they have a hard cap. I don't even remember the number, but basically they're always taking their every year or every epoch on AVAX. They're always taking whatever their actual supply is, and they're looking at the supply cap. They're turning that. They're taking 1% of the difference, and they're inflating that much. Does that make sense? So every year they inflate less and less and less, but they never reach the hard cap. And then of course AVAX burns in gas. Does that make sense to you guys? So that way it kind of has equilibrium. Do you guys get what I'm saying? It expands but contracts. So I mean, Phantom. Yeah, if Phantom does have that hard cap there, yeah, it's still elastic. If that makes sense. Yeah, that might just be like it can never go higher than that number, which is also fine because it's arguably pretty close to that number now. Yeah, so if I know for a fact Phantom expands every year and then it also burns in gas. So if it does have that hard cap, that's fine, but it's like an upper limit. And the good part, yeah. Oh no, for sure, Alessio. Yeah, they think of like, oh, it'll never go up there, but it's like, yeah, because it's burning and then it's always going to be resetting its level. Does that make sense? And to be honest, you know, when you click that I. Sometimes the DAO of these fucking projects, they can just vote to change the fucking cap too, you know? So Ethereum has it expands by an integer, but it contracts by a percentage. Does that make sense? Do you guys remember me talking about the greatest way to achieve equilibrium is to either expand? Yeah, no, and of course Alessio shows that cap too. But the point being is even if it does have a max supply, it's still elastic. Like it's not actually reaching that hard supply. Like that, it just, yeah. Because as soon as it does that, it's going to stop expanding. So what they do in order to keep their ecosystem moving is they expand by a smaller amount every year, depending on where supply goes. Yeah, so I can, you know what? I will definitely fucking verify that I'm telling you the right thing. I know I'm telling it correct about AVAX because I just looked at AVAX last month. But I'm pretty sure Phantom is very similar to AVAX, at least in their tokenomics. Then I'm pretty sure it's elastic. Anyway, the boardroom of a tomb fork is like a sink with a floating ball valve. Does that make sense to you guys? It's a floating ball valve, meaning as soon as the TWAP goes below a certain threshold, what does the faucet do? Does that make sense? Imagine that you have a sink and it's plugged, so there's no drain to the sink. And you have the sink open and it's pouring water into the sink. But the good news is there's a safety mechanism. Yeah, it closes. Yeah. So as the sink fills and there's a plunger, or not a plunger, but there's a floating ball valve. If there's a floating ball valve in the sink, effectively, Pega's correct, the floating ball valve will shut the faucet off. Does everybody understand me? And I'm going to pull back that fucking, that same sink. I just look for it again. But, does that make sense? So imagine this sink if it didn't have a drain, right? So if a sink didn't have a drain, it would just fill up. And you can see in this sink, it even has that safety drain. So if you clog or you plug the bottom drain, it'll still not overflow. It'll still have this safety drain, which drains out the side. You guys see that there in the picture? Okay, so this is kind of the way that a tune fork works. So the tune fork does in fact have a safety where it won't overflow, meaning if it doesn't see the value in continuing to fill the sink, it's not going to. And effectively speaking, I want you guys to think about like the basin of the sink as the total system of the instrument, meaning the total amount of investors, holders, liquidity pools, and all that stuff. The sink, yeah, the basin is the system from which the currency cannot really escape. Does that make sense? The basin is where it mostly is. When you bond, you are taking a cup and filling it by dunking it into the filled sink, and you are keeping that cup outside the sink. Later, when the sink level drops, you can pour that cup back into the basin. Does that make sense? And this is effectively the entire mechanism of a tune fork. But what the fucking problem is that here, and I'll post this diagram because of how great it is. Effectively, a tune fork was a sink. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and the thing is, Pega, there was no point using the cup because there's no TRB. Like, there's no, yeah. And the thing is, Pega, the cup makes sense if you create TRB for the fucking coin, because then you actually have a reason to buy the peg coin again. So the bonding helps the buy pressure on the peg coin. Like, if you pull the bond out, you can, in fact, make buy pressure on the peg coin have higher price impact, which will get it back up to peg. But if nobody's buying the fucking peg coin, then it's not getting back to peg. So tune forks were sinks. Yep. They had a faucet. They had a faucet with a ball valve. And they had a cup. They had a cup they could use to temporarily pull water out of the basin. What do they not have? Tune forks, sinks did not have actual drains. Does that make sense? They didn't have fucking drains. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? So imagine this. Imagine you have a sink in your bathroom and it never drains. Like, do you guys understand that at a certain point you don't want to use that water anymore? Oh, yeah. Hilarious. Can you guys imagine? I mean, back in the day, I want to say a few hundred years ago, they didn't have sinks in your house. You had like this water bowl. Does that make sense? And if you wanted to shave or brush your teeth, you effectively used this kind of murky bowl of water. Do you guys know what I'm talking about here? And then they had chamber pots too, right? You guys get what I'm saying? Not even that long ago, okay? Yes, exactly. So the point being is, what do we do to keep the water fresh and usable? Does that make sense? Usable, I guess. But we have to install a drain. Yeah, exactly. We have to install a drain in the sink. Because draining the sink out allows new water to show up, Maddie. Because if the water level is too high, which is effectively meaning the price is too low, it means that there's too much, there is too much water to keep filling this sink. So the tomb fork stops printing, and that is the safety mechanism, because that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to not inflate all the fucking time. You now need to make sure that something is happening to increase demand